The information contained within this podcast is general in nature and should not be construed as advice nor substituted for qualified professional counseling or mental health therapies. If you are genuinely in need of deeper assistance, please seek the advice of qualified professionals. Welcome to the Unpacking Grief podcast with Drew Marriott and myself, Ian P.F. McDonald. Join us as we delve into what grief is, how it can differ for each of us, and how we can explore techniques for healing and growing to help both you and those around you in processing grief.
So, episode 6, we're here.
It's huge. 6 is a great number as well.
We kicked off the trajectory last week with our first guest, and our second guest is one that we're both very excited about and was even mentioned in our last week's episode. Scott, you'll have to look out for your name in episode 5. How you doing, Scott Tejerian?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Ian and Drew. Great to see you both. Great to be here with you.
Well, we're thrilled. I'm thrilled especially. Thanks for making the time for us. It didn't take long for you to get back to me, and we're interested in hearing what you had to say on a different topic this time. We listen intently to all of your podcasts on astrology, and we want to see how that plays into our podcast and go from there.
For those of you who don't know Scott, you probably heard us talk about him a lot because he is the reason that our paths crossed, Drew. And we've all connected over so many. I mean, I met Scott because Scott met Margot, and then I think we were one of your first Synastry readings. We've been friends ever since. We've talked about all of the projects that both of us do in great detail. We even walk dogs together at the park on occasion.
Yes.
And through doing a chat room on Clubhouse, specifically about like spirituality, the quantum realm, the undefinable realm of reality that's non-physical, and everything pertaining to it, we would have Scott on and talk about his perspective from an astrological point of view. You also run your own podcast. If you could tell us about that, please, Scott.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I met Ian, going back, that was my first, like, official reading that I'd ever done for somebody was you and Margot. So we do go way back. And then, yes, I met Drew. He came and did a reading with me. And I have a podcast. Yes, it's called The Weekly Transit. The Weekly Transit I do with Ingrid Iverson. Been doing that for about, well, let's see, we're up to episode 124 now. So we've done 124 straight weeks of the Weekly Transit where we highlight the transit of the day, so to speak, for the entire week. To help the listeners find the flow with the planetary energies, riding the planetary waves instead of the planetary waves riding you. And I have a second podcast as well called The Uncharted Territories. And Uncharted Territories, I do with Shara Prophet. She's a licensed hypnotherapist and a medium. And we look at public figures who have lost their lives prematurely or unexpectedly. And Shara meets with their spirit. And I look at where the planets and stars were aligned when they were born and when they passed over. And so that's a fun conversation whenever I'm meeting up with Shara to discuss the different subjects. And so we're almost done with our second season. We have one season out right now.
And it's kind of handy. My second episode of my other podcast, What Even Are We, was Scott telling everyone in great detail about not only what he does, but what astrology is, its history, its links to so many facets of daily life. And if you want to find out more, we'll link that in the show notes as well. Now, Drew, you're going to steer this episode, I believe. This episode, you've got a topic in mind.
I suppose. I mean, way to put me on the spot. But no, I mean, Scott, going back to when we first met, and then, with the passage of time, everything that happened with Zachary, Scott, much to his credit, the man that he is, who's very generous to reach out and do a parent-child reading for Zach and I. And he also has an amazing memory. He is like the autist of all astrologers. I mean, the charts and the placements that he seems to recall on command is just amazing. But as you spoke of the project with Shara Prophet, I wondered what you may have learned over the course of, that time, that you might have been able to go back and look at Zach and I. There were some things that I had jotted down. I had spoken of, my own personal transits, and one that had stood out for me was Pluto opposing my natal sun. And I had looked at Zach's earlier today just to jot down a few. A few that he had to play: Moon opposing natal Pluto, and Pluto conjunct natal Sun. All of which, in the resource that I used, they referenced death in the immediate family. And so while there was speculation and some folks who spoke to me and asked about whether or not you can see these details per se, not necessarily predict, but anecdotally go back. I know that you had explained that maybe there were clues in a chart that might suggest, a timing of a passing. I wondered if you had gleaned any clarity, further clarity in that project to the aspect of death and astrology.
In understanding, like looking at the day that he passed in relation to the day that he was born, the time that he was born.
Yeah. And not just him. I mean, you have others as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we can definitely look at that and get deeper. What was the day of his passing, Drew?
It was April 16th.
April 16th of 2021. And do you know approximately what time that occurred?
Well, it's 10:32.
10:32 a.m.
A.m.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where was this exactly?
It would be Pennsauken Township, New Jersey.
Okay, Pennsauken in Camden?
Yes, Camden County. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So, yes, I mean, you are correct that, at the time of his passing, Pluto, the god of death, the planet of transformation, was conjunct with his sun. Now, of course, it was conjunct with everybody's sun who was born on January 17th or January 16th. It doesn't matter, January 15th, what year that would be. So, of course, when Pluto is conjunct the sun, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to die, but it does indicate a transformation of some sort is occurring. What makes it even more intense for Zach is he was born with the sun in the 8th house. And so the 8th house is associated with the 8th sign, which is Scorpio. This is known as the house of death. It is ruled by Pluto. Scorpio and the 8th house are ruled by Pluto. So that intensifies that transit for somebody that's an 8th house sun. Of course, everyone who's born around Zach's birthday right now is still experiencing this transit because Pluto was at 26 degrees in Capricorn when Zach passed over on April 16th, 2021, and Pluto is exactly back at 26 degrees right now. It's retrograded back. So it indicates transformation. What intensified it even more for Zach on this day is on April 16th. And again, this is the same for everybody who was born on or around January 17th. On April 16th, April 17th, right around those dates, the sun is at 26 degrees in Aries. And so Aries is cardinal fire. Capricorn, where the sun was when Zach was born, is cardinal earth. So they're both cardinal. They make a very powerful connection with one another because they're near to the same degree. They're both the same modality, but Aries is fire, and Capricorn is earth. So fire scorches earth, earth extinguishes fire. This creates a very intense alignment known as a square. It's a 90-degree angle. So if you had 4 90-degree angles, it would look like an actual square. So that indicates, regardless of the year, and anyone who's born around January 17th, every year on or around April 16th, April 17th is going to be a challenging period. We all have these challenges. Whenever the sun squares our sun, which happens twice a year for everyone, it's a very challenging period. To what degree? It all depends on what's going on in your life and how you're working with the energy. So those are two indicators right there that indicate, or indicators that indicate that there's a challenge coming.
Just for the listeners, I'll let them know that this was recorded on Sunday, August 21st, in case any of that information about what's happening right now, as Scott said, is pertinent to you.
Yes, and so Pluto it's at 26 degrees right now, and it's going to continue at 26 degrees for several more weeks. In fact, let's see, it's going to be at 26 degrees for, it doesn't even get back to 20. It ends its retrograde at 26 degrees, and so it doesn't move to 27 degrees, which was the degree the sun was at when Zach was born, but it doesn't get back to 27 degrees until December 9th. So yes, it's August 21st, but all the way until December 9th, Pluto's going to be at 26 degrees because it moves very, very slow. It's the slowest moving planet. It's the furthest planet from the sun, and so it takes a very long time, 248 years, for Pluto to do what the Earth does in a year, transit through all the signs of the zodiac.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's excellent stuff, and it's something, again, we discussed previously, but for the benefit of the audience and trying to, kind of get some familiarity with the astrology piece, and we're going to make it relevant as it applies to grief.
I would say, one other point too, and I don't know if you want me to share my screen and show you what I'm looking at or whatever. I don't even know.
Yeah.
So
it's all
yeah, please.
So you can see here, this is what we were talking about with Pluto conjunct the sun, and then the sun squaring the sun right here. Now, over here is Mars, the god of war, the planet of action, aggression, conflict. It's at 25 degrees in Gemini. So in the days leading up to this point, Mars was moving into conjunction with Zach's ascendant. So that can create a lot of aggression. It's during this period leading up for probably, I would say it's probably about 8 weeks leading up to this point. There was the god of war just like banging its drum in the unconscious of Zach. That's what happens whenever Mars moves through the 12th house, and the 12th house is the house that represents your psychological baggage, guilt, shame, regret. And so by the time it gets here to the ascendant, it's like it feels like things are going to pop. There can be a lot of aggression building up within a person that needs to be released. But in addition, Mars is also opposite Zach's Chiron. Chiron is the wound and the ancient wisdom that is unlocked through healing that wound. So he was very activated, I imagine, with regards to facing his wound, which was in regards to the daily routine, his health, diet, job, future outlook, connection to spirituality. It was being activated in a major way during this period.
Yeah, and all that makes sense. He through conversations that he had had at Wawa, he was seeking out, or they found him, one or the other, spiritual practitioners, and he would have conversation and searches about, his name, the origin of his name, even in the time leading up, and images and of whether they were tattoos or whatnot, but they had a very ominous kind of feel to them. So again, in looking back, I can imagine that, as a 20-year-old, that he may not have known what to do with some of these unconscious things that he was experiencing. But it's apparent how they played out in his conscious, life and the day to day. There's just one more question on him, and then, perhaps, we can make this a little broader for the audience. But Chiron sextile natal Mercury, that I jotted it down as one that might have, potential story behind it for him. Is there anything you see in there?
So let's see, the transiting Chiron was sextile his natal Mercury. So yeah, I mean, that's like an awakening to the wound, to his self-confidence, how he relates to the community, the group, the club, the organization. So that is Chiron connecting to his Mercury. There was becoming an awareness, maybe of some insecurities that he had within the social construct or group context. Saturn over here, though, this is a very difficult transit of Saturn at 12 degrees in Aquarius, squaring his moon and his Mars. You talked about, he was digging into the origins of even his name and those sorts of things. So Saturn is the planet of responsibility and hard work. It is the planet of restriction, squaring off with his Mars, the planet of action, and his moon, the planet of emotions. So taking a very deep and potentially difficult look into his roots and wanting to move forward in some way, but feeling restricted and unable to move forward, and maybe even involved in with regards to his karmic bonds, the people that he felt most intimate with in his life. This was also connecting to his Pluto, though in a more positive way, and connecting to his Mercury as well. You mentioned Chiron connecting to his Mercury. Saturn was also connecting to his Mercury. So really like a deep, concentrated thoughts on future, past, how do I get there? Can I ever get there? Then the moon, also at 15 degrees here, transiting, was squaring his Venus. So maybe there was some sort of emotional challenge with relationships in the short period that this transit was occurring. And it was also opposite his Pluto, which can be a difficult transit because it means the transformation of your emotions. And when the moon is going through the 12th house, that is a very difficult transit. I always try to alert people to be aware of when the moon is transiting through the 12th house. Of course, you want to know when Mars is there too, because that really rattles what is going on within the unconscious. But the moon happens every 28 days. And so when the moon transits through your 12th house, that is when you feel an emotional sensitivity towards the guilt, the shame, the regret, the blame. You may be more moody or brooding, or looking to just like, what, I'm just gonna run off and nobody cares about me. And you have these sort of periodical thoughts that doesn't mean that those feelings aren't real and they're not valid, but you might be over exaggerating them in some way. And you really need to just show yourself compassion so that you can integrate all these difficult thought patterns with understanding, forgiveness, and love. So that was the moon here in the 12th house.
Gotcha. Another interesting component there.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Yes, of course. You're welcome, Drew.
So, from a general perspective, again, the more you've done this with Shara and even just with general, readings with your clients, can you, are there any aspects that might lend to a better ability to process grief, if that makes sense? I know that there are, there are outward components of personality and then the inward, right? So I suspect if there is something that could be a clue for that, it would lay on the introverted side of personality. Is that something that you might have gleaned any perspective on?
Well, I would just say that it helps me process grief to understand somebody's astrological code. I went to 2 funerals this past week, and 2 people that both had an incredibly strong impression upon me when I was, basically 0 to a child until 18 years old. One was a family friend who we went on a lot of trips with. He was a part of our church. He was 73 years old, and he died quite suddenly. He had a stroke, and they took him to the hospital, and they gave him, I think, some blood thinners or something, and he seemed to be doing fine, getting better, and then they took him to the ICU just to monitor him, and he had a massive heart attack and died instantly. And then the other was one of my best friends growing up, his older brother, who was actually like 15 years older than him. It was his mother's son, but they had a different father. But he was also very active in the church that I went to, and he was someone I looked up to a lot because, when we were in our teens, he was in his late 20s, early 30s, and so he was really cool to us, and we had a lot of fun with him. We went on several ski trips and that sort of stuff with him, and he had pancreatic cancer and had been suffering for a long time and passed away actually back the end of June, but they waited a while to have the service. So, but I don't know their birth times, but of course, I looked at the day that they were born and just seeing where the planets were aligned, even if it wasn't specific to the minute, and seeing how their planets connected to my planets really helped me re-experience them in a way where I could really understand why did these men have such an impact on me? Why were they the way that they were? And it's just sort of like an internal celebration of their life within myself. And so yesterday, actually, I was at my friend's house, the brother, and his mom was there, and we were just laughing because I was telling them how it's like everybody in their family is either a Virgo or a Sagittarius, and so it's just so bizarre. Literally, everyone's either a Virgo sun or a Sagittarius sun, and it just, I don't know, that just made me laugh. And I was explaining to them what that meant, and it all made sense to them. So, yeah, that's how you make sense of it. At least I do. That's how I make sense of it. I just want to say, and it's fascinating if I can bring this up, Drew, but
Absolutely.
You and Deanna, the fact that Deanna is reflecting Zach's chart in a super specific way that's whoa, this is
to hear me tell it is one thing. It's the emotional, I own it. It's something amazing. But I can remember back to that Sinistry reading that you did for us, and to hear you tell it the way you did. And it's, I put a lot of weight into what you've seen and your art. And it's just an amazing occurrence. and it's definitely an example of things that are, beyond our understanding, but certainly not coincidental in any way.
And Scott, for people who are listening to the podcast, you do readings, but do you have a history of people doing readings for grief? Is that something that comes up?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if they really articulate it that way, but people come to me and they want to look at their father or mother or somebody from their life that has maybe passed over, and it helps them make sense of their relationship with those individuals. And so, yeah, for sure. I think it brings a lot of peace. A lot of the times I do readings for people, I'm looking, they want to know about a date from the past. Maybe it was when somebody died, and they want to know what was going on in their chart in that day. And so when you can make sense of it and be like, oh, wow, so it makes, now I have the clarity of that experience. And it doesn't feel so random. It feels more purposeful. And when it feels purposeful, then it's easier to accept.
It's so much going on. When you speak about this, it's how effortless it seems to you to retain all of this data about the effect of these planetary bodies. And, it's like a programming code. You always call it a code in a language, and it is. I mean, we don't know the other side, right? We don't know what it is. We don't know what we are. We just wake up as a human. Here we are. Here's a life. Here's your family. Here's how you do things. Here's a bank, right? Mm-hmm. It's always landed with me that that's an unusually strange thing, and I don't know where that comes from. I just have a little thought that's always there. I'm like, why are we here? I love it. I'm grateful for all of it. But like, why am I not a jellyfish on some other planet or a plant? Why this? And I just find it so beautiful that like there's this code that you are so attuned to, that essentially, the way I see it, is changing energy into these beautiful personalities, and we come and we go.
Yeah. That's it.
Scott, the practice that you just described, those two recent losses for which, I share in your loss, and is that something you just started then? It just happened, or is it something that you've been doing for some time?
Oh, yeah, for some time. I mean, over the last several years that I started getting into this, every time I go to a gravesite memorial or something, I'll look at like the tombstones and just wonder about the people that are buried there. It's like, oh, this person was born on this date, they died on this date, what was going on, what was their, and just figure out who these people were and what was happening in their life when they passed away. So it's definitely a natural sort of curiosity for me. So,
or a superpower.
Or both. To the degree, I mean, have you ever experienced a loss for which you opted not to look into the astrology?
Well, I guess it depends on how close I am to the person. My dad died 14 years ago, and I've looked at where the planets were when he passed, but it tends to be more when I'm less connected to it. It's harder to process sometimes when I'm too close, because it feels you're just dealing with so many other thoughts and feelings and emotions, and it's harder to really be coherent. I can look at a chart and see different things, but it doesn't necessarily resonate as strongly because I'm so in my emotional state. So
what about for other people on the flip side of that? When you're doing the reading, do you see them have difficulty with the information as well, or is it something that they go through similar to the way you would, or does it provide relief?
I think the information is helpful and healing to them to hear it and to understand it. I mean, I have people in my moon cycle classes, a couple of people that have just lost, one person lost their mother, the other person, the mother is close to passing, but explaining to them what's going on in their astrological code, not their parents, but them personally, has been very helpful and healing to them in understanding why they're experiencing this difficulty in their life at this point in time. It goes back to like what I was saying before. I think when it doesn't feel random, when it feels like there's a reason behind it, it's easier to accept. It's kind of like taking medicine that might not taste good, but you know it is good for you, so you do it as opposed to push it away.
And I hope it's not too personal to ask, outside of the astrological approach, what have you found is a helpful way for you? We like to give perspectives for our audience so they can try different things on. Is there any techniques or ways of dealing with grief that has been helpful to you?
Well, I guess the greatest grief I felt was when my dad died, and you know, I just embraced the emotions of it. And I think what's most important for grief is understanding what works for you. I can't really tell somebody how to grieve because, you know, it's like when my dad died, on the day that he died like in the morning. He was in hospice, and, you know, we were there with him when he took his last breath. My mom, my sister, two of my aunts, my cousin. It was very a beautiful way to go, you know, because he was surrounded by so much family and loved ones and a lot of love. But when we got back to the house, my mom was like, okay, well, we got to clean the house because there's going to be people coming over, so we got to get everything organized. I'm like, I'm going to my room, so I don't really care how the house looks. So, you know, go ahead, you can do whatever you want, but don't ask me to do it. And then when I wrote the obituary for my dad, and I was like in the living room or something, and I was writing this out, and I was just like weeping, and my mom and sister are like, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I'm like, "I just wrote the obituary for my dad," which is, I mean, that's why I'm a mess here. And they're like, "Well, do you want to speak at his service?" I'm like, "No, I'm not speaking because I'm not going to be able to get any words out, you know." But you know, but this week it went to the parent, the family friend who was 73. Both of his kids spoke at his service, and they both did a really nice job. They got a little emotional, but it wasn't like overwhelming where they couldn't like say what they wanted to say. But you felt their emotion, and I thought they did a really wonderful job honoring their father. I don't think that I did less of a job honoring my father by not speaking at his funeral, because I didn't have the ability to do that. In my dad's service, there was over 700 people there. It was standing room only. I mean, there were people outside the church. There were people in like the social hall separate from the church where they were like piping in the sound from the church. And it was super intense and powerful. And two of my dad's friends spoke, and they both did an incredible job. And when it was over, and I was sitting in the front row with my mom and sister, and we were the first to walk out, and we're walking down like the center aisle of this church with just like hundreds of people packed in, and I just was like looking at all these people, and I just lost it. You know, I was just like crying. It was just a mess, you know, just holding on to my mom and sister, and the three of us were crying walking down and out of the church. And then my dad's sister came up to me, and she was like, "You're so courageous." And I was like, "Really? I'm a mess." She's like, "No, but you're so open with your emotions. It's inspiring to see how courageous you were in just your grief." And I was like, "Wow, okay, cool." You know, I wasn't really trying to be courageous. I just knew that I was just going with what I felt, And when I saw those people there, I just felt like my dad really didn't even know how many people he touched. And, I think he was really hard on himself at certain times in his life. And that's what really just struck me, where I was like, wow, like this man made an incredible impact on this community. And I just felt so proud and sad too, that like he wasn't there to see it, though I know like he was in some ways and so on and so forth. But yeah. And my cousin, I still remember my cousin giving me a hug, and he had tears in his eyes, and he's never hugged me like that before, and I don't think I've ever seen him cry before or since then. And yeah, it was really amazing.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that. It's tough. I mean, I lost my dad in '98, and without all the details, I guess one dynamic that perhaps we're all a little familiar with is, the sibling aspect of things. And at least for me, I'm the baby by 10 years, and then I have 3 other siblings older. Everyone, I mean, generationally, they've all had different relationships with our respective parents. And, while in a moment you tend to treat some heavier memories as a collective, and you assume that what you remember because your siblings were there, it's a cohesive, unified, one story. And then with the passage of time, as people heal through, they either center out some parts, they edit here and there where they need for them, but then there's a perception as an onlooker when you have conversation, well, wait a second, you were there, and it never got to the point where we bickered over that, but it was clearly a phenomenon that I detected, especially, with my sister, that there was a different trajectory and different copings. And I wonder what, if you found comfort and cohesiveness in the, in mourning with your siblings, both of you.
Ian?
Well, I mean, for me, I have a delicate balance with my siblings. My brother and I are closer than I think we've ever been, which is great. I'm just waiting for my sister to come back in. She's, independent out there as her own little unit at the moment, and that's okay. Whatever she needs to do to heal is what I hope for her. But it's the processing of how different people we are. It's times like this where you really realize how different your siblings are, because there's all this pressure of how to cope with a situation that's incredibly unique and rather rare. We don't usually have to deal with the tough stuff together, because the tough stuff, you're off doing it on your own, as are your siblings. But in bringing it all together and then all having a stakehold in how things eventuate, or how they desire things to eventuate, can really add some pressures. So for me, I tended to be like, I'll do it if it's needed to be done, but if you guys want to jump in, no worries. So I was peacekeeping in that regard, and that's the way that I helped everything get along with my father's loss, and with the loss of my mother. My brother, at the start, it was almost I could detect that they thought I was going to step in, and I couldn't, just because of the nature of, the restrictions through the 2020, 2021. I wouldn't have been able to get to see my mum because of, the lockdowns and everything else. So my brother had to step in, and we had to, my sister went there as well, and she helped, but, I was here just zooming it all in, so to speak. It's a really unique, and forgive the language, but slightly fucked up way to watch a parent go. I had to say goodbye over Zoom, and I don't think I'll ever forget that moment where I essentially feel like I saw my mum's heartbreak. So, yeah, but I'm very grateful for both my siblings, and, I wish the best for them, and I'd love to have the best relationship I can with both of them, and I'm there with my brother, and open invitation to my sister if she's listening. But
And I've got Zach in my ear here.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's...
Well, it's funny. I felt so put on the spot. I was like, this is not the question that I would have chosen to answer. And you both just went, Ian. And I was like, oh, shit.
So, wait, Ian, so you were communicating with your mom via Zoom in like the last day of her life or something? Or
Yes,
so
exactly.
she saw you on the screen?
Every day for the last few years, I would call her minimum 1 to 2 times a week. And then over the last, I think it was probably from around April onwards, it got a bit more frequent. So it could be like 2 or 3 times. And then, after she went into hospital, it was every day, multiple times every day. And I was there for every excruciating moment. I was talking to doctors. I was being liaison, and after a certain point I had to actually step up and start kicking asses and taking names, because I was like, this is not cool. You're treating her like palliative. You're basically drugging her, and the drugs that she was getting, I asked for the drugs and the prescriptions and I researched them, and I was just not happy. But by then it was way too far gone, and this is the system we live in. Once people are in hospitals, they go with what the prescriptions are, and a lot of prescriptions are quite harmful, and no one can tell me otherwise. You can give me all the science in the world, but the fact is that a lot of people die from prescriptions and a lot of exacerbations of existing conditions, if you will. So yeah, it was hard. I literally won't forget a moment of any of that.
That's
and it
rough. Yeah.
It probably warrants further discussion. I don't know if there's a call out to folks who have shared a similar experience with Ian where they had to say goodbye to a loved one via technology.
Through COVID, there's so many different types of situations that have happened over the last 2 years. This is an open call to anyone with a unique situation, with a situation that might even be confusing, because that's the hardest part about all this is grief is confusing enough as it is, but with such an unusual world that we've just lived in, I'm sure there's people out there that have stories that would, not only bend our mind, but maybe help other people as well.
Scott, how did you navigate those waters with your siblings then and now? Is it again, something that has continued in your lives, or have the siblings kind of gone, inward with their process?
Yeah, when my dad passed, it was very difficult. Like I said, with my mom and sister, just their reaction. Not saying that it was wrong, because through that experience, I learned that everybody grieves their own way. And now with the knowledge that I have as an astrologer, I understand why my sister and mom reacted the way that they did and why I reacted the way that I did. But at the time, I was quite angry at my mom and sister for not grieving the way that I was grieving. And I even did something, kind of mean to my sister the day that my dad died, because like one of my cousins, the one who was with us when he passed, he was visiting from Washington State and we're in California. I hadn't seen him in a long time, and him and 2 of my other cousins who live locally went out for a drink, and I met up with them without telling my sister. I purposefully left her out because I did not want to be around her. And so that's what I was feeling. I was just angry and I think that's kind of a natural feeling when you lose somebody so close to you. There are feelings of anger that come up, and you want to push those upon the other people that are closest to you. So for me, it was my mom and sister. But over time, and even at the time, like I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I felt bad for it immediately. Yeah, it feels like by the time the funeral happened and all the grief just came out, I couldn't be angry anymore, and I just accepted that everybody's going to grieve their own way, and I can't, nor should I, control other people's grief or how they're experiencing this. Nobody's wrong. And so, now everything's fine with the two of them. And it was shortly after my dad passed. But we do remember things differently. And I just equate that all to the astrology. Everybody has their own way of seeing the world, and nobody's right more than another person. We each have our own perspective, and we have to learn to accept and respect the perspectives of others. And I'm very grateful that I know what I know about my mom and sister's astrological codes, because it makes it a lot easier for me to just let them be themselves, and for me to just accept and respect who they are and not try to make them more like me.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, I guess I just would say that it's good practice to allow everyone to process in that way, whether you have their astrological code or not. Everyone's unique, and everyone's going through their own process in their own way, and all we can do is what we're doing right here: support, try and bring information, try and relate, and bring comfort and some words of encouragement through your process when we can.
That's a great point, because as we said on our clubhouse, and we do a clubhouse every Saturday morning Pacific time and midday Eastern time, but you can find that from our website, which is Unpack Grief Pod. No, it isn't. It's unpackinggriefpodcast.com. But we say at the beginning of that we're not there to offer any advice, and this is something we've picked up from other groups, because it's something that's best derived from your own calculations in other people's experience. And seconding your point there, Drew, it's exactly what we're aiming to achieve here, is hearing so many different perspectives and allowing people to not just learn about grief, but about themselves, others, acceptance, all the good things. I think we're out of time, boys.
Well, geez, I definitely I can envision Scott coming back at some point and sharing some more information with us, and maybe going a little bit deeper into things.
I'd love to, anytime.
And Scott, just a quick query. You've kind of blown up over the years. How many people follow you now? Like it's quite a big, large base you've got, right? Is it the thousands or the tens of thousands? Where are you at now?
I'd say thousands. So, I'm not like some crazy celebrity, but yeah, I mean, definitely it's a trip when I get lots of messages from people I don't know thanking me for what I do, which is very special. I feel very blessed and fortunate to have had an impact on people all over the world, and I hear from them and I feel their gratitude, and I'm very grateful that what I'm sharing is helping them. I'm very thankful for that.
Well,
That's
you got
what
two
I love
more
to do.
right here. Love
Thank you,
man.
Ian.
Absolutely.
Love you too. Thank you, Drew.
Love you, Scott. Thank you,
Love
man.
you too. You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us on Unpacking Grief. If this podcast is helpful to you, then please subscribe and consider helping others to find us by rating us 5 stars on your podcast platform of choice, and by sharing us with your friends and family directly. You can contact us and keep up to date on Instagram at UnpackGriefPod. If you'd prefer, video versions of all episodes are available on Spotify and YouTube. And if you have any questions, suggestions, or would like to find any of our recommendations, you can do so on our website, unpackinggriefpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.